I always give beginning plant owners the advice to ensure that they have drainage holes in the bottom of their pot, despite me knowing that you don't actually need them. One of the absolute worst pieces of advice that the internet gives new plant owners who are just trying to find out how often they should water their plant is to stick their finger in the top 2 inches of the soil. If your top 2 inches are dry, then your plant is dry. Here's why that's some really bad advice for a lot of indoor tropical houseplants. Plants don't always dry uniformly. They generally dry from the top to the bottom. Any soil exposed to open air will dry first, so the top soil is going to be significantly drier than anywhere else in your plant. This gives you the false sense that your plant is ready to be watered again. You feel that the top 2 inches are dry, but the rest of it could still be soaking wet. Now that you're watering your plant again and again with no time for it to dry out, you're taking away the access to oxygen for the roots. Wet soil condenses on the roots, removing its access to oxygen. As the plant dries out, those air pockets return, giving your roots a chance to breathe again. It's a really fine balance of your individual plant's needs for its access to water and access to oxygen. With your soil soaking wet and having less access to oxygen, this makes the perfect environment for certain bacteria and fungi to thrive and multiply in your soil. It's these specific pathogens that attack your roots, attack your stem, causing it to rot and die off. It's these 3 key pieces of information that people miss, and with no drainage holes, your plant is sitting in a pool of water with no oxygen, causing those fungi and bacteria to thrive and multiply, and that's what's killing off your plant. Now, I don't need drainage holes because I can see how wet or dry my soil is throughout the entire pot. I have X-ray vision. He's lying. He just uses glass containers. Okay, so when you use a glass container with no drainage, all of the same rules apply. You can use a glass container, but adding amendments to increase oxygen is really important. Added perlite and orchid bark will increase oxygen and lower the total amount of water that your soil can retain. And always ensure you start with a healthy plant and a great root system. Because the danger of no drainage is that your plants could be sitting in wet soil for longer, you want to ensure that your plant has high amounts of light. With high light, the roots will pull more water from the soil, which will dry out the substrate faster, which will increase the access to oxygen. A plant in low light will stay wet for longer, and if there's lack of access to oxygen, that will encourage the root-killing bacteria and fungi to multiply again. Now that you have your plants in containers with no drainage, and you have a fundamental understanding of why you need drainage, you can just watch to see how quickly your soil dries out. But now we have another problem. Glass containers expose your plants to algae growth, and sometimes extreme algae growth. It isn't harmful to your plant, and like any plant, it produces more oxygen, which will be beneficial for your roots, but it kind of looks ugly and bad. And while hydrogen peroxide can kill off algae growth, we're trying to create a healthy biome in our soil. Hydrogen peroxide will kill all bacteria, good and bad. So this brings us back to using a cover pot with no drainage, trying to figure out how not to overwater our plants. Which brings us to the stick method. Sticking a wooden stake all the way to the bottom of your pot tells us how dry the soil is. After leaving it in for a few seconds, a dry stick means that your soil is dry, and a dirty stick or a damp stick means that your soil is still wet. Which brings me to the entire reason why I made this video. Moisture meters, they do not work if you're using anything other than pure potting soil. They use contact with the prongs to measure electrical conductivity. Wet soil has lots of contact and conductivity with the prongs. As the soil dries out, there's less conductivity and the moisture meter reads as being dry. But if you use a soil mix like the one I showed you in this video, orchid bark, perlite creates more space for oxygen. And more space means less contact and less conductivity with the prongs. So less contact is going to trick your moisture meter into thinking that its soil is dry when it's actually not. Chunky soil that's good for monsteras, philodendrons, pothos, and lots of other indoor houseplants is going to mean a less reliable moisture meter. It's going to tell you that your soil is dry when it actually isn't.